In December 1939, Stalin sent 450,000 soldiers into Finland. Finland had a population of 3.7 million people. The Soviet Union had 170 million people. Military analysts gave Finland 2 weeks. What happened next became the most embarrassing defeat in Soviet military history. Almost nobody knows it happened. On the morning of November 30th, 1939, the Red Army crossed into Finland with orders signed in Moscow and a timetable set for victory in 2 weeks. 450,000 Soviet troops advanced across the border, an invasion force larger than the entire population of Helsinki. The Soviet order of battle listed 8 rifle divisions, 2 mechanized corps, and thousands of supporting units. Artillery followed in waves, 6,000 field guns, 1,200 mortars, and 1,500 anti-tank pieces, all primed for a campaign that planners believed would be over by Christmas. Stalin's generals issued the directive. Each man would carry a single greatcoat, a blanket, and rations for a fortnight. Soviet columns stretched for miles, engines rumbling through forests and over frozen lakes, their confidence built on numbers and firepower. The scale was overwhelming, the outcome on paper never in doubt. But the forests of Karelia would prove otherwise. Soviet command ordered the invasion to move swiftly, but their confidence bred a fatal rigidity. The entire advance relied on a single, narrow road, with columns of trucks, tanks, and artillery jammed together, stretching for miles through the forest. Officers insisted on strict marching formations, with every man carrying only a single greatcoat, a blanket, and rations for just 2 weeks. The plan assumed Finnish resistance would crumble, so there was no provision for winter gear or extra supplies. Soviet newspapers printed victory predictions before the first shot was fired. But as temperatures plunged below -40 degrees, underdressed soldiers began to freeze in place. Vehicles stalled, unable to leave the road without bogging down in deep snow. The scale that once promised victory now trapped the Red Army in its own logistical web, every mile forward, tightening the noose. White suits vanished into the snow, leaving only the faint hiss of skis cutting across the frozen ground. Finnish soldiers moved with a speed that defied the landscape, covering up to 40 kilometers in a single day, while Soviet columns crawled along narrow roads, trapped by their own numbers and the deep drifts. The Finns' training began long before the war, with every conscript drilled in winter survival, cold weather marksmanship, and silent movement through pine forests. Manuals issued in 1938 described camouflage as a weapon. The forest is our shield, the snow our cloak. In the worst of the cold, when the mercury fell below -40, a diary entry from the Kollaa front captured the reality. The whole formation is frozen solid, even the metal of our rifles bites the fingers. The abandoned tanks in the snow look like iron wolves that have turned to stone. While Soviet soldiers froze in khaki coats, Finnish patrols used home-sewn white smocks and fur-lined boots, blending into the drifts and striking with a precision that seemed impossible for such a small force. The cold was not an enemy, but an ally. Every step, every breath was a test of endurance. In this environment, numbers counted for less than adaptation, and the forest itself became the deadliest weapon. Yet what these men would do with such tools, and how they would wield the land itself against an empire, was only beginning to unfold. At Kollaa, the numbers shrank to the edge of myth. 32 men, a single rifle company under Lieutenant Aarne Juutilainen, faced Soviet battalions advancing through the trees. The line was so thin that one telegram, sent on December 28th, recorded just 32 defenders after a withdrawal, yet the riverbank never broke. Juutilainen's answer to headquarters became a rallying cry. Kollaa will hold. The defense was not a matter of brute force, but of method. The Finns executed the motti in 3 relentless steps. First, ski squads cut the Soviet columns into isolated pockets, felling trees across the only road and vanishing into the forest. Second, snipers and machine gunners, men like Simo Häyhä, whose tally would approach 500 confirmed kills, struck from white drifts, unseen and uncatchable. Third, Molotov cocktails and demolition charges finished the work. burning vehicles and closing every escape. Soviet units, trapped in snow-choked pockets, found themselves encircled, freezing, and leaderless before they ever saw their attackers. For weeks, the same handful of Finns rotated between the trenches and the forest, patching every breach, enduring bombardment, and returning fire with rifles that froze to bare skin. Diaries from the front describe hands cracked and bleeding, men sleeping upright in snowbanks, and the silence after each Soviet assault. Yet the line held. The impossible became routine, and the myth of 32 men became a symbol of a whole nation's refusal to yield. The Soviets, with all their numbers, could not break through. The cost of each failed attack was only beginning to register, and the world was starting to take notice. Soviet losses in Finland defied every expectation. Cemetery registers and post-war records placed the Red Army's casualties between 125,000 and 168,000 men, killed, wounded, or missing, against 25,000 Finns. The imbalance extended to machines of war. More than 1,200 Soviet tanks were destroyed or abandoned in the snow, engines seized by cold, or crews lost to Mati ambushes. Photographs from the Kollaa front show fields littered with twisted metal, the remains of a mechanized force that never reached its objective. On December 14, 1939, the League of Nations expelled the Soviet Union for its unprovoked assault, the only major power ever cast out. The humiliation was total, and the world took notice. German intelligence officers sifted through the after-action reports from Finland with growing fascination. In the spring of 1940, staff memos circulated in Berlin, dissecting the Red Army's failures, including columns immobilized by snow, supply lines shattered by small bands of Finnish ski troops, and entire divisions lost in forests they could not control. Wehrmacht planners noted the collapse of Soviet command and the inability to adapt under pressure. By early summer, these lessons fed directly into high command briefings. General Franz Halder referenced the Winter War in his war diary, citing the Red Army's fragility of morale and logistics as a weakness ripe for exploitation. Hitler, reading these assessments, saw not just a setback for Stalin, but proof that the Soviet Union could be beaten swiftly. The defeat in Finland was no longer just a humiliation, it became a blueprint for Barbarossa. 32 men against 500,000, logic says they fall. Instead, the myth of Soviet invincibility shattered in the snow. Today, small nations still watch and calculate. History's shadows linger.